Golf Today Roundtable as we welcome in our colleague Jaime Diaz. And Jaime, there's a lot to chew on in the game these days, but let's start right here with Lucas Glover. Has he done enough to deserve a spot on the Ryder Cup team now, or has he merely earned a spot in the conversation?
Well, I think he's earned himself a favorite spot in the conversation because I think he is the model for which the task force on the Ryder Cup was looking for in terms of getting the hot player. He's done everything possible that you could do late in the season to convince people that he's the right kind of guy to get on the team. And he's done it so impressively by winning twice, obviously, but also improving that thing that was so lacking in his game, which is putting, and so important in the Ryder Cup, and become, I think, convincingly a very good clutch putter. I mean, those were very clutch performances, and just so much to recommend him. He's an old hand now. I mean, look at this, the smoothness of that tempo. It's not a guy who looks yippy at all. And he was holding out the 3- and 4-footers that used to give him so much trouble with great smoothness, too. So I think that's very encouraging. That sort of growth, that sort of clutch, gene and toughness, I think speaks volumes for a guy who can come to the Ryder Cup and handle the pressure. And also be a good example to other players that, hey, you can get through this kind of thing and be a good team room guy who can encourage others. So I just think Lucas, if he just keeps playing pretty well, and gets to the Tour Championship, and nobody ahead of him between, let's say, 13 or 12 and 15 wins, I think he should be on the team.
Lucas Glover, one big story, and I agree he should be on the team. And another big story, this new Billy Walters book, where he alleges that Phil Mickelson bet $1 billion over 3 decades, lost $100 million. Where does that allegation sit with where Phil Mickelson sits in professional golf today? Well,
I think it's actually a secondary consideration based on the big picture, which Phil Mickelson, I think, really did a disservice, as Lanny Watson was talking, to his legacy and to the game of golf by really encouraging LIV to exist, by being available, by recruiting other players to that group, and making it bigger than it would have been without him. And he did it, who knows why, but it appears that he needed money. And money was important, and when you look at the gambling debts that probably were incurred, it's not unreasonable to assume it had something to do with it. And so that gambling is what I feel gave Phil this very difficult position to try to negotiate in his personal life that ended up being something that actually affected golf a great deal. As far as the actually placing the bets, I'm not shocked. I mean, if you go to the UK, you can bet on yourself as a player. It's totally legal, and nobody says, oh, that's improper, or even you can bet on your own team if you had a Ryder Cup team, I'm sure. So I don't know, it didn't offend me that much. It didn't shock me, certainly, that Phil was considering it. It's a heck of a lot of money, and obviously we have a Pete Rose example, and Billy Walters, according to his account, he seized on that quickly. He said, you can't do that. But honestly, it's done all the time in golf in the UK, so it didn't bother me. But what Phil did in the big picture has bothered me, yes.
Phil did actually respond to that Billy Walters excerpt last week, where he issued a statement on social media saying that I never bet on the Ryder Cup, and while it is well known that I always enjoy a friendly wager on the course, I would never undermine the integrity of the game. I have also been very open about my gambling addiction. I have previously conveyed my remorse, took responsibility, have gotten help, have been fully committed to therapy that has positively impacted me, and I feel good about where I am now. I guess my question, Jaime, is there's obviously no evidence that has been offered that Phil Mickelson has ever gambled on golf. Clearly the suspicion is there, but there's no evidence of that. Should this be a matter of concern for the other bodies running tournaments where Phil Mickelson is still competing? LIV also has a no gambling clause in its rule book. But if you're the PGA of America, the USGA, the Masters, the RNA, Phil's playing all of those events. Should there be some kind of investigation as to whether or not it is an issue?
It's an interesting question because, golf, it's just endemic to golf that we all gamble. I mean, $2 Nassau, whatever. It's part of the culture. I'm not equating that to Phil's amounts, but just the idea that gambling is bad in golf doesn't really strike me as something, that is so obvious. I think if someone bet on themselves to lose, and you can trace that, yes. But if you're betting on yourself to win, it seems to me that's what golfers do all the time, just by being a pro. You're betting on yourself every week, basically.
But it's a slippery slope, isn't it? Because of the inside information that a professional athlete would have. And page 140 of the PGA Tour rulebook explicitly says that you can't. You can't bet. You can't bet on property at events, and you can't bet on events that are co-sanctioned or sanctioned by the PGA Tour.
Well, there it is. I mean, that's a rule.
It's the rule.
It's not a rule in the UK. Again, I don't know how strictly that can ever be enforced.
Yeah.
I would not be shocked at all if Phil bet on golf. And I think others probably have too. I don't know this. Obviously, it just feels like it wouldn't be that big a sin, even though it's in the rule book. You never hear about, you hear about, oh, we had a friendly wager, or yeah, I put some money on this college football game. I don't know how it affects the competition unless you're betting on yourself to lose.
I want to show you another quote here from, it didn't get as much attention, from another live player, Harold Varner III, to my Golf Week colleague Adam Woodard. He said, I also don't think people on the PGA Tour should get compensated for being loyal. I think that's blank. I don't think anyone should. You had the option to go. And this is an interesting question he's raised here, because it's a very valid argument that there was a business decision to be made. These guys chose one path, the Tour loyalists chose another, and you don't get some kind of make good after the fact. The flip side of that is, as Varner has said, as Phil Mickelson has said, that live guys aren't that interested in going back to the Tour, yet Jay Monahan has created a committee to discuss what are the terms or potential sanctions these guys have. Do you see a scenario where live guys are actually ever going to accept sanctions to go back to the PGA Tour? And should the guys who stayed actually be rewarded for it?
I think it ends up being what happens in the deal with the framework. If the PGA Tour has the leverage it would probably like LIV to go away. And if LIV went away, where would those guys want to come play? They want to come play to the PGA Tour. And so in that case, yes, I could see a scenario. It may be unlikely at this moment because it doesn't appear that the Tour has absolute leverage at this moment. But as far as, the former question, should PGA players who stayed get compensated for staying? I thought Jon Rahm was very explicitly moral in his answer, which is, I made my decision, I factored in everything, I feel good about where I stayed, I'm good. I don't need to be compensated.
And those guys are getting, if you play well, you're getting enough money on tour next year. I mean, the FedEx Cup winner gets $25 million next year. That's a make good.
Nobody's hurting on the PGA Tour. Jaime, no shortage of things to talk about. We appreciate the time.
Thanks, Dave.